All right, we're going to be going over Derek Walcott's poem 14. One of the things that I want you to realize is he is a Caribbean poet. If you just read over this poem, it is really difficult in its first reading to understand. But as you go line by line and pick apart the meanings and the ideas, then I think that you gain a richness that Walcott intended for us to understand. So Derek Walcott was a Caribbean poet. So we're going to start by reading the full thing all together, and then we'll go back line by line and discuss. With the frenzy of an old snake shedding its skin, the speckled road scored with ruts, smelling of mold, twisted on itself and re-entered the forest, where the dashing leaves thicken and folk stories begin. Sunset would threaten us as we climbed closer to her house up the asphalt hill road, whose yam vines wrangled over gutters with a dark reek of moss, the shutters closing like the eyelids of that mimosa called Tea Marie. Then, lucent as paper lanterns, lamplight glowed through the ribs, house after house. There was her own lamp at the black twist of the path. There's childhood, and there's childhood's aftermath. She began to remember the minute of the fireflies, to the sound of pipe water banging in kerosene tins, stories she told to my brother and myself. Her leaves were the libraries of the Caribbean, the luck that was ours, those fragrant origins. Her head was magnificent, Sidon. In the gully of her voice, shadows stood up and walked. Her voice travels my shelves. She was the lamplight in the stare of two mesmerized boys, still joined in one shadow, indivisible twins. There's a magical quality to the poem, but most students don't get a lot out of it in the first reading, and it does require a good deal of work. So let's get started here. I've told you he was a Caribbean poet, and so now we move into line 1 and part of line 2. We start with the frenzy of an old snake shedding its skin, the speckled road. So here, in this first part of this line, we have a metaphor being set up, or an allegory, a metaphor or an analogy being set up, where we have the snake being compared, or the road actually being compared to a snake, in the way in which the snake twists and moves in and out of the forest, but also the roughness of the snake's skin and the earthiness of the snake twisting on itself, the way that snakes twist, snake imagery, all with the roughness of the skin, the movement, roughness. Twisting on itself, re-entered the forest where the dashing leaves thicken and folk stories begin. So we are giving life to a road. Most of us don't think of roads as too particularly interesting. But in setting it up like a snake, and the movements of a snake, and the texture of a snake's skin, you have the road becomes living and becomes dynamic. So the metaphor makes the road dynamic. Now, as I'm going through this, these are the things I'm seeing. These are my interpretations. This is what I'm getting out of it. Some people might annotate slightly differently or see something slightly different based on their experiences. One of the things to understand is that we work from what we know of life experience, especially when it comes to poetry. Someone from the Caribbean who grew up in the culture is going to see a whole lot more and have a deeper understanding than I will, for example, who have only encountered, incidentally, Caribbean culture. So, we have the road compared to a snake, given the characteristics of a snake, even in its ruts, like the rough skin. Then we get to line 4, and we have the dashing leaves, these big leafed plants, thickening, and folk stories beginning. So we have nature being connected to culture. And in places that have very unique, dynamic environments, like Caribbean islands, for example, where the interplay of the sea, the ocean, and the land, and all these things create really dynamic environments, you end up with very strong cultural impacts. Same thing in other environments like Alaska or the Rocky Mountains or the Appalachians. The really dynamic land impacts how you live and how you think. We're linking culture to nature and the impact, the interplay between environment and the culture that develops. Sunset would threaten us as we climbed closer to her house up the Asphalt Hill Road. So here we have sunset threatening, which of course is personification. It's threatening the boys. So here we have that personification, and again, nature maybe not being totally pleasant and all welcoming. There's a roughness and a danger to nature that is portrayed here. Sunset would threaten us as we climb closer up to her house up the asphalt road, whose yam vines wrangled over gutters with a dark reek of moss. So here we have the boys, or our poet, talking about getting to the house up that same asphalt road that was compared to a snake. And then we have the yam vines wrangling over the gutters, wrestling over the gutters. Potential personification again. So we have those wrangling vines and very strong imagery throughout so far. And that's also something I want you to understand, is that a lot of times we talk about literary devices as if they're separate things that each occurs independently of others. And that's not true. Literary devices interact, they overlap, they interplay, sometimes they're dependent on each other. So sunset threatening us is personification, but it also creates a very strong mental image. And so you have sensory language there with those strong images. And also, something I did not mention, but I would be remiss in not pointing out, smell of mold, and then we have the reek of moss. These are all sensory language. Sense of smell. Specifically, remember, I don't want you to call sensory language that's not imagery, imagery. I want you to be more specific. Imagery is, I want you to focus that on images painted in your mind, whereas appeal to smell or sound or some of those things are sensory language as well, but not really technically imagery. You are invoking a lot here to paint the picture of the environment. And we have the interplay of darkness and light that you'll also see. The dark reek of moss, the shutters closing like the eyelids of that mimosa called T. Marie. Shutters closing like eyelids. Well, that is, of course, a simile. And again, also imagery. And then we're still linking the shutters, the man-made world, to nature. So we have this strong link, I want to say continuing, between nature and culture, or if you want, the human world. Then, loosened as paper lanterns, lamplight glowed through the ribs, house after house. So we have the windows with their closed shutters and the lamplight shining through the closed shutters, creating ribs of light, as if the houses are living creatures. Almost on the edge of that. There was her own lamp at the black twist of the path. Okay, so I had to stop for a few minutes because the mowers were here. They were getting too loud. As I was saying, there was her own lamp at the black twist of the path. Okay, so here they have arrived at her house, the boys, and we have her, unidentified as of yet, own light, at the black, dark twist of the path. In the next line, we have there's childhood and there's childhood's aftermath. And what I begin to realize in this moment right here is that we're no longer talking just about the road or the path. That the road, the path, has become perhaps a metaphor for life's journey. And we have this woman who is providing light at the black twist of the path of the life journey. So a twist in this case is a change, unexpected, not understood. Light. When we're dealing with light and darkness right here, I'm getting a sense of wisdom for light, which is often a symbol of wisdom. Light, the lamp of wisdom, which is a very old symbol and tradition in Western cultures, at least. And the darkness, the unknown. I always have trouble saying that word correctly. So we have here that she is providing light, wisdom at a time that is changed for these boys. And that's confirmed, in fact, by the next line, or maybe not confirmed, supported by the next line. There's childhood. There is childhood. The boys are in childhood. And in that same place, there's childhood's aftermath. Well, we need to think connotatively about what is childhood. Childhood is often innocence, encumbered, the handwriting, unencumbered joy. There's a freedom that children have, a simplistic view of the world that allows them to not have the worries and cares that you get in your adolescence. When life gets complicated, we have this path, this road winding in and out of the forest, suddenly taking on more of a metaphor type thing, and it even colors what we read before. that the boys journeying up the road and to her house are on their life journey through childhood. A place of sometimes danger, but of magic and mystery and those sorts of things. She began to remember at the minute of the fireflies. Well, when do we notice fireflies? At sunset. At sunset, when that darkness comes on. And what is it she's beginning to remember? Well, that's unclear yet. She began to remember at the minute of the fireflies, to the sound of the pipe water banging in kerosene tins. Okay, so again, we're linking a natural event, nature, and contrasting nature contrasted with the human world. And I may not be explaining that well, but there's this sort of connecting of these things, even though they're contrasted in a way, they're connecting the human world to the larger nature, to larger universe, life existence. But you're also giving a mesmerizing, throughout the whole thing, there's a certain lulling, almost a hypnotism as you read through the lines, that begin to take hold of most readers or listeners of the poem. She began to remember at the minute of the fireflies, to the sound of the pipe water banging in the kerosene tins. Stories she told to my brother and myself. Remember, she's remembering stories. What kinds of stories? We do know that the stories might provide the lamplight of wisdom. So we have, going back to those previous lines where we had her own lamp lighting the black twist in their path, in their journey, as they journey from childhood, that simplistic, joyful, some time where we don't realize how complex and dark the world may be. And then moving into the more complex adult world, the aftermath of childhood, where we may be happy, but we're never quite as happy, freely happy, as we are in childhood. So the stories might provide that wisdom, the lamplight of knowledge. So we read on. Her leaves were the libraries of the Caribbean. Again, we have metaphor, and we're linking nature to culture. Libraries preserve culture. They preserve the storytelling and the records of culture. And so now we're getting a sense of these stories are cultural stories, histories maybe. Who knows? But they're part of the story of the Caribbean culture. So she's sharing these cultural stories, these folk tales, as we have them up here, to the libraries of the Caribbean, to these folk stories. She, it seems, is giving them the cultural education through the sharing of their stories. The luck that was ours, those fragrant origins. So origins, again, the cultural origins. And we're employing sensory language here, sense of smell again. We've had a lot of imagery all throughout. You can take your pick on that. Our narrator is telling us that her stories are a gift. I really should make these larger because my handwriting's big and serial killer-ish sometimes. Her head was magnificent. Sidone. We're not really talking about her physical head. We're talking about her memory, and the richness of her cultural wisdom. In the gully of her voice, shadows stood up and walked. Okay, so here a gully, a ditch, or a dip. So you get the sense of a lulling voice. My dyslexia is acting up today, as it always does when I print. A sense of lulling voice, a rhythm. But in the gully of her voice, shadows stood up and walked. What are the shadows? The stories become real. The characters of the stories become real feeling. They're standing up, they're walking, they're acting, they're doing the things. Her voice travels my shelves. Well, we've already had references here to libraries of the Caribbean and folk tales and stories. So here, I want to say his mind or memory is what I'm seeing. Certainly, some people may see slightly different things or have, based on their experiences, maybe be more educated in the culture in which Walcott produced his artwork. She was the lamplight in the stare of two mesmerized boys. Lamplight, that wisdom again, that lamp of wisdom or knowledge, capturing them and mesmerizing, hypnotizing. Again, I have trouble spelling when I'm printing. In the stare of two mesmerized boys. So we have her capturing these boys and pouring her knowledge and wisdom in. And of course, she was the lamplight. That's a metaphor. And I tell you that as we get to the end. She was the lamplight in the stare of two mesmerized boys, still joined in one shadow, indivisible twins. So here we have the brothers. We know they're close in age, or we got the sense they were close in age. But now we are seeing they are twins. And one of the things about twins, oftentimes, especially when really young, is they're always together. Maybe sharing a life. They're sharing life. They may sleep in the same room. They may bathe together. They may go to school and sit in the same classes. They're always together. And that's where you get this still joined in one shadow, one life. Or you could be looking at this, if you're using the dark and the light as wisdom, still joined in lack of knowledge at the time, lack of enlightenment or education that she is providing to them. So her lamplight, we have that light and dark again working together. And at this also stands out to me because the stare of two mesmerized boys still joined in one shadow, indivisible twins. This might imply that they no longer are. And of course, twins might be more together all the time when they're younger, but then as they move into adolescence and that, they may depart from each other, where they're not sharing the same room, or maybe they're sharing the same room, but they're not sharing the same activities as they enter that adult world. A sense of loneliness, perhaps, or a sense of loneliness, a sense of increased isolation in adulthood that the boys didn't share when they were young, more simplistic children, as all children are. There we are. That's not everything. This poem is very dense, but very condensed, and there's so much detail. But this gives you so much that you could write about in the way of literary devices, how those literary devices interact with each other, overlap each other, even create each other in some cases, and also gives you a chance to explore some of the cultural ideas that he's expressing. So there we are.